I never imagined my marriage would unravel the way it did. From the outside, everything looked normal, quiet dinners, shared routines, polite smiles that fooled friends and family alike. But beneath that surface, something had shifted. I started noticing the small things first: the guarded phone screen, the sudden late nights, the emotional distance that crept into conversations that once felt warm. At first, I told myself I was overthinking. Long hours and stress can change anyone, I reasoned. Trust, after all, is supposed to be the foundation of marriage. The truth revealed itself slowly, and that made it worse. There was no dramatic confession or explosive argument at the beginning, just fragments that refused to fit together. A name I hadn't heard before appearing too often, a scent that didn't belong to our home, laughter in her voice that I hadn't heard directed at me in months. Each detail chipped away at the life I thought we had built. The more I tried to ignore it, the louder the reality became. When I finally confronted her, I wasn't angry yet. I wanted clarity more than anything. I wanted her to look me in the eye and tell me I was wrong. Instead, she hesitated. That pause said more than any words could. In that moment, the betrayal stopped being a suspicion and became a fact. She didn't deny it outright. She tried to justify it, blame distance, boredom, misunderstandings, but excuses only deepened the wound. What hurt most wasn't just that she had chosen someone else. It was how easily she dismissed the years we had shared. I felt a strange mix of emotions: humiliation, disbelief, and a cold, steady anger that settled in my chest. I didn't shout. I didn't break anything. I simply listened as she explained how it just happened, how it didn't mean anything. Those words echoed in my mind long after the conversation ended. If it meant nothing, why did it destroy everything? That night, I sat alone replaying every memory, questioning what was real and what had been a lie. Trust, once broken, doesn't shatter loudly. It collapses inward, leaving silence behind. I realized that betrayal isn't only about infidelity. It's about the loss of respect, honesty, and safety. The person who was supposed to stand beside me had become the source of my deepest vulnerability. That was the moment the story truly began. Not with violence or confrontation, but with the quiet realization that my life had split into two parts, before I knew and after I couldn't unsee the truth. The betrayal lit the fuse. Everything that followed was set in motion by that single, irreversible discovery. The situation might have ended with words if pride and recklessness hadn't entered the picture. After the truth came out, the atmosphere in the house changed completely. Every conversation felt sharp, every silence heavier than the last. She began staying out more openly now, no longer pretending there was nothing going on. That was when I realized I wasn't just dealing with betrayal anymore. I was dealing with someone who felt entitled, someone who believed he had already replaced me. I met him for the first time by accident, or so I thought. He showed up at the house one evening without warning, standing in the doorway like he belonged there. He didn't look apologetic or uncomfortable. He looked confident, too confident. His eyes scanned me the way people do when they think they've already won. The tension in the room was immediate, thick enough to feel. My wife froze, caught between two worlds she had tried to keep separate. At first, the exchange was verbal. He made comments that were meant to provoke, subtle insults wrapped in smug smiles. He wanted a reaction. He wanted to establish dominance. I stayed calm, responding as little as possible, but that only seemed to irritate him more. Some people mistake restraint for weakness, and he was clearly one of them. The more controlled I remained, the more aggressive his tone became. Things escalated quickly, a step closer, a shove disguised as an accident. Words turned sharper, louder. I could see it in his posture. He had already decided how this would end. To him, I wasn't a husband or a man who deserved respect. I was an obstacle he felt confident he could remove. When he finally swung, it wasn't out of sudden rage. It was calculated, fueled by arrogance and the belief that there would be no consequences. The moment he attacked, the entire dynamic shifted. Adrenaline kicked in, narrowing my focus. I defended myself, keeping my movements controlled, precise, and deliberate. I wasn't fighting out of anger. I was reacting to a threat. Furniture scraped across the floor, the room filled with noise, and the situation spiraled out of control far faster than anyone expected. My wife screamed for it to stop, but by then, it was beyond her control. What struck me most wasn't the pain or the chaos, it was his shock. He hadn't expected resistance. He certainly hadn't expected discipline. Every move he made was wild and emotional, while mine were measured. The confidence drained from his face as he realized he had misjudged the situation completely. This wasn't the easy confrontation he had imagined. When it finally ended, the room fell silent again, but it was a different kind of silence, heavy with realization. Lines had been crossed that couldn't be undone. What began as betrayal had now turned into open conflict, and there was no going back to pretending this was just a private marital issue. Violence had raised the stakes, transforming a personal crisis into something far more serious. From that moment on, consequences were inevitable, and everyone in the room knew it, even if they didn't yet understand how severe those consequences would be. For a brief moment after the fight, no one spoke. The air felt charged, like the pause before a storm finally breaks. He stood there breathing hard, his earlier confidence completely gone, replaced by confusion and anger. In his mind, this had been a simple show of force, a quick way to assert dominance and scare me into backing down. What he didn't realize was that he had just stepped into a situation far bigger than himself. I reached for my phone, not in panic, but with calm intention. That alone seemed to unsettle him. He smirked at first, probably assuming I was calling for help, maybe the police, maybe a friend. The idea amused him. He leaned back, acting relaxed, as if the worst was already over. That was when I told him, quietly and without drama, to stay exactly where he was. He laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Or what?" he asked, trying to reclaim the upper hand. That was the moment I decided there was no reason to hide any more. I looked him straight in the eyes and told him who I was, not raised voice, not threatening, just a simple statement of fact. I said I was a federal agent. I said he had just assaulted one, and I said that everything from this moment forward would be documented, recorded, and handled accordingly. The change in his expression was immediate and unmistakable. It was as if someone had pulled the ground out from under him. The color drained from his face, and his posture stiffened. He searched my face for signs that I was bluffing, waiting for a crack, a smile, anything to suggest this was intimidation. There was none. Calm unnerves people far more than anger ever could. My wife spoke then, her voice trembling, asking what I meant. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stepped back, creating distance, and calmly explained that I had been trained for situations exactly like this. That my job required restraint, observation, and control, not impulsive reactions. I made it clear that what just happened wasn't a private argument or a misunderstanding. It was an assault, and it carried consequences he clearly hadn't considered. He started talking fast, stumbling over his words, suddenly eager to explain himself. The same man who had strutted into my home minutes earlier now looked desperate to undo time. He claimed it was a misunderstanding, that emotions ran high, that he didn't know. But ignorance doesn't erase actions, and fear doesn't rewrite reality. The power dynamic had completely flipped. Where he once stood confident, he now avoided eye contact. Where he had tried to intimidate, he now pleaded for calm. He realized too late that he hadn't attacked a helpless man or a defeated husband. He had attacked someone trained to handle threats and empowered to ensure accountability. In that moment, the truth settled heavily over the room. This wasn't about bravado or revenge. It was about exposure. His actions were no longer hidden behind arrogance or secrecy. The mask was gone, replaced by the cold awareness that he had made a serious mistake. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something shift, not anger, not pain, but control. I didn't move to retaliate, even though every instinct born from betrayal and adrenaline urged me to. That was the difference between chaos and control. I had spent years learning that real power isn't proven by how hard you hit, but by how precisely you act when emotions are at their peak. This wasn't a bar fight or a street argument. It was a situation that demanded clarity, restraint, and procedure. I stepped away and documented everything while it was still fresh. Photos of the damage, notes of what was said, what was done, who witnessed it. My voice remained steady as I explained, calmly, that the moment he chose violence, he lost any leverage he thought he had. This wasn't about settling scores. It was about accountability. He kept interrupting, trying to bargain his way out with apologies that came far too late. I let him talk. People often reveal more when they're afraid. When authorities arrived, the contrast was striking. He tried to present himself as calm and reasonable, but his earlier aggression lingered in his posture and tone. I didn't need to exaggerate or dramatize anything. I simply stated the facts in order, without emotion. Years of training had taught me that the truth, presented cleanly, carries its own weight. My composure unsettled him more than any threat ever could. As statements were taken, I watched the realization settle in on his face. This wasn't something he could laugh off or intimidate his way through. Every word he had spoken earlier, every shove and swing, now existed outside his control. There were reports, timelines, and consequences that didn't care about his excuses or bravado. The system doesn't respond to ego, it responds to evidence. My wife stood off to the side, silent. The gravity of the situation had finally reached her too. What she once treated as a secret affair had now spilled into something public and irreversible. I didn't look at her with anger. I looked at her with finality. This wasn't revenge against her or him. This was the natural outcome of choices made without regard for boundaries or respect. When he was escorted out, the house felt different, quieter, but clearer. The chaos he brought with him left alongside him. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt resolved. Justice isn't loud, and it isn't flashy. It's methodical. It's patient, and it doesn't require you to lose yourself in the process. That night, as I locked the door behind me, I understood something deeply. Staying within the law wasn't a limitation. It was my greatest advantage. While he reacted on impulse, I acted with purpose. While he tried to dominate through fear, I relied on structure and accountability. In the end, the outcome wasn't decided by who threw the first punch, but by who understood that order always outlasts chaos. The aftermath unfolded slowly, not with dramatic explosions, but with steady, unavoidable consequences. Days passed, then weeks, and each one reinforced the reality that nothing could return to the way it was. Legal processes moved forward, indifferent to emotions or regrets. What had started as a hidden affair ended as a matter of record, and there was a strange sense of relief in that. The truth no longer lived in shadows. It existed plainly, documented and undeniable. My wife tried to talk to me once everything settled. Her words were softer now, stripped of defensiveness and justification. She spoke about mistakes, confusion, and how she never imagined things would go this far. I listened not because I needed closure, but because it confirmed what I already knew. Accountability changes people. When consequences become real, excuses lose their power. I didn't argue or accuse. I simply made it clear that some lines, once crossed, erase the future you assumed would always be there. Walking away wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I chose dignity over bitterness, clarity over chaos. Ending the marriage felt less like a loss and more like reclaiming something I hadn't realized. I'd been giving away self-respect. There was no celebration, no sense of victory, just a quiet certainty that I had done what was right, not only legally but personally. As for him, the bravado that once defined him disappeared entirely. He avoided contact, avoided confrontation, avoided anything that reminded him of that night. The confidence he weaponized so casually turned into caution. He learned, perhaps for the first time, that actions carry weight long after adrenaline fades. Watching that transformation wasn't satisfying in a cruel way. It was satisfying in a moral one. Karma doesn't always arrive with drama. Sometimes it arrives as reality setting in. What stayed with me most was the lesson itself. Strength isn't about dominance, and justice isn't about revenge. True power lies in restraint, in choosing not to become what threatens you. I could have let anger dictate my actions, but I didn't. That decision preserved more than my freedom. It preserved who I am. In the quiet that followed, I rebuilt my life piece by piece. New routines, new focus, a renewed sense of purpose. The betrayal no longer defined me. It became a chapter, not the whole story. I learned that closure doesn't come from watching someone else fall. It comes from standing firm when everything tries to pull you apart. In the end, there was no dramatic final scene, no loud declaration of victory. Just a man walking forward with clarity, knowing that justice had been served, boundaries restored, and lessons learned. That was enough.